Hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the SoccerWire Podcast. Today we're talking about the U.S. Soccer Federation.
Uh-oh.
Dun, dun, dun. Just kidding, everyone. We wanted to get some thoughts and observations in the can, as they say in the business, ahead of the big AGM, the annual general meeting that the Federation is holding in Nashville this weekend. That event, as well as some of the other proceedings around the Federation, we thought were worthy of some discussion. There are specific topics being discussed at the AGM and around the Federation right now that have direct effect on the youth soccer scene, on the professional game, on the fan experience, on the general state of American soccer, with everyone being more conscious than ever of these matters and the Federation's effect on maybe their little corner of the soccer world. We thought it was worthy of delving into. I'm here with Chris Hummer, SoccerWire founder, and our esteemed producer, the crack, the ace, Bridget Baker. We're going to chop it up a little bit for you guys. And of course, as always, news at thesoccerwire.com. If you want to provide your feedback, send us an email, hit us up with any questions, topics, suggestions, etc. All right, Chris, let's get into it here. I love the framework we've got for you, for the listeners today. I'm supposed to pretend like I know what I'm doing on this topic and know what's going on, and I'm going to help you come to terms with the Kremlinology, as I call it, of Soccer House. What's happening around the Federation? Let's do this.
Definitely. And I'm really excited because we're recording this on February 12th and we're planning to air it after the AGM happens. So it'll be a really good test at your
my
foresight.
Prognostication skills. Yes. Well, that right there it tells the listeners something. We can guarantee, I won't guarantee anything that I say on this microphone.
I'll guarantee whatever you say.
Predictions are a fool's game. However, I think it's noteworthy that much of what's going to unfold in the formal proceedings of this meeting in Nashville, we have a strong inclination of how it's all going to happen and what's going to go down. That's not to say everything, because there's some specific bylaw and policy proposals that are intriguing. And actually, again, you, the listener, will have a direct effect on your experience or your kids' experience, or at least on some level, the money you are paying to be involved in American soccer. So stay tuned for that. But in general, and I wouldn't want to guess how the membership, the rank and file, is going to vote. But there's a vice presidential election happening. There's again the aforementioned policy proposals. We're going to mention a couple of the most prominent ones, and then around the Federation as a whole, we've had some interesting things unfold. Most of them, probably the most notable, being with regards to Jay Berhalter and the still vacant CEO position at the Federation. Some interesting movements there. About a week ago, the news broke that Jay Berhalter, who's a longtime Federation employee, you know that last name. He is the brother of men's national team coach Greg Berhalter, and he's been sort of some would say the power behind the throne within the Federation over the last arguably decade or more, but definitely the better part of the last decade. He's nominally his focus is business, the economic side of the Federation, but we have widespread reports and accounts that he's been more involved, especially as the Jurgen Klinsmann era on the men's side of the program kind of unfolded, the latter period. He stepped into some technical decision making, was involved in the launching of the development academy and some things like that. So a very quietly powerful person who did not have much of a public persona, didn't like to do interviews. I had multiple interview requests denied or sort of postponed or pushed off, and but he was widely perceived to be the front runner for the CEO position that was vacated by Dan Flynn last year. Over time, there was a perception that he was sort of in waiting, that he was the lead candidate for it. And then a really striking thing happened last fall. We can say now with retrospect, a group of Federation insiders, employees, as best we can tell, or people with close knowledge of the day-to-day affairs of the Federation at Soccer House in Chicago, took to Glassdoor, which is most of you guys have probably heard of it. It's a well-known sort of employment site, clearinghouse, place to register feedback, sort of a Yelp for the corporate world maybe. And somehow or another, this became a topic of conversation among soccer insiders, among the social media conversation that happens around American soccer in general, and then even spread all the way into the New York Times and beyond. The fact that there was this, I don't know what else to call it now. In retrospect, we can say there was a quiet mutiny, a rebellion of at least a handful of Federation employees who saw that Jay Berhalter was headed for the CEO position, and
the circle of trust was broken.
Well, they felt that their only recourse to try and prevent this from happening, that this was such a potentially disastrous hire, that they took to a public site to basically put this longtime executive on blast in a way that the culture of that organization didn't encourage or allow. And now here we stand in February of 2020. It worked.
Yeah, it's a dangerous thing though, right? I mean, it's you see stuff like that. Any group of people could get together and basically collude to get rid of somebody they don't like, and it happens all across the world. But yeah, it seems a lot of that stuff was pretty specific, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term. And everything happens for a reason in these echelons. So New York Times gets a hold of it. Who knows where it goes from there? But yeah, it definitely worked, I think.
So ever since the 2018 USSF presidential election, which I was fortunate enough to go and cover that for SoccerWire and some other outlets down in Orlando. And I'd never been to an AGM before. And I was fascinated and bewildered and just blown away by the sort of the treacherous, dodgy, insidery murkiness of that.
I've actually only been to one.
Process.
I've never been involved with at the management level of a state association, or to the point, basically never been a representative in any way of an organization that had a vote. So I only ever went to one as 2001 or 2002 in San Francisco, and my only claim to fame was I let Bruce Arena beat me in pool in the hotel lobby.
Well, this is one of those events. It's not necessarily a fan-friendly event. That the Federation would love for you to come to national team games, support your local club team, and so forth. But this is they
don't want you to see this.
This is how the sausage is made,
yeah,
for sure. And I wish that I think probably the system as a whole would benefit if more of us in the media sector could be more immersed in these sort of insider things. But it's also by nature difficult to get your arms around. It's difficult to figure out what's going on. And my experience in covering that presidential election was that this would be tough to understand fully and be able to report on fully, even if you were dedicated solely to this. And maybe we'll see a growth of the sort of soccer business media, where there's been a little bit of movement in recent years to allow for more of this. But I think ever since the 2018 World Cup qualifying failure of the men's national team, the rank and file fan or parent or coach or whoever, if you're in this game, if you devote any amount of time or money or effort to this sport in this country, you now maybe feel like you have to at least have one ear to what's happening in terms of the organizational politics and the relationship between Major League Soccer and Soccer United Marketing and U.S. Soccer and all the sort of constellation that's grown up around this now multi-billion-dollar industry. So I think we know what's going to happen. I think I have a high degree of certainty that we know what's going to happen in this vice presidential election, which is coming up this weekend.
They're not related, right? I mean, like the vice president is not Jay's position.
That's correct. Right. That's correct. Now, and we have to remember too. So the U.S. Soccer Federation is both a national governing body that has certain rights and responsibilities to FIFA, to the federal government, and so forth. It is also a nonprofit. So there's these layers of management and governance and accountability, and
well, they make a profit. They're just not allowed to,
of course,
distribute it to
surplus,
their owners, quote unquote.
And most listeners will be very familiar with the surplus, and they've in recent months, the last board meeting, the Federation talked about their plans to spend some of that surplus in what they believe are the most urgent ways to improve technical
And they did
quality.
Just announce, I think yesterday, they upped this really cool
the
grant
programs are now doling out millions of dollars to what, as best we can tell, are very deserving grassroots organizations and initiatives by membership. But the actual AGM is attended by rank and file members of the federation, which is not necessarily people that buy tickets to national team games.
Break this down for me. So you've had the state associate, who's voting, and this was part of the confusion 2 years ago during the presidential election.
Right.
Let's just spend 2 minutes telling listeners who votes.
And picture the pyramid, right? The American soccer pyramid has professional clubs and leagues on it. Of the top division being MLS and NWSL, then you have lower divisions, semi-pro. You have USL. You have, and then you have the
if you're
amateur
involved
side.
in soccer in this country and it involves having like a pass of some kind, like a license of some kind, a player pass, a coaching, you are a member of the federation, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, if you might be in a men's league or a co-ed beer league, your kid might be playing anything from rec up to the development academy. Some chunk of the dues that you or your club is paying on your behalf are going towards the federation. So this does touch on you, and actually there's a proposal in front of the membership in Nashville this weekend. The Metropolitan DC Virginia Soccer Association has tabled a proposal to slash registration fees that are paid to by everyone except the pro leagues. In this case, this specific proposal is for youth and adult leagues. Instead of the current $1 per player. And remember, again, think about the scale of the game in this country. Everyone who's playing in an organized sanctioned league that is sanctioned by a federation membership body, which includes USU Soccer. As far as I understand, it includes all the leagues that we would imagine here, and all the rec leagues and adult leagues and so forth. Everyone is supposed to be paying $1 to be sanctioned by the federation. Metro DC Virginia Soccer Association wants to cut that down to 10 cents per youth player from $1, and then adult fees. The adult fees are $2 at present, and they would be cut to 20 cents. And as Bo Dur over at Soccer America has done a really great overview of the AGM and the pressing business.
Bo knows soccer.
He's this guy. Well, Bo's been around for as long as any of us or longer, and is able to dive in with both his sort of skill set and his background. He has a real adeptness at diving into these things and trying to encapsulate them. So check that out over at socceramerica.com. But he points out that a decade ago, these registration fees accounted for more than 10% of U.S. soccer revenue, which is striking. Now, bear in mind, that was a much smaller pie back then. Now they're barely 5%, and that number has been flat. So, and this ties into some of the bigger picture topics we've discussed on this podcast and on SoccerWire.com about stagnation in the number of kids that are playing the game in this country. In some cases, it appears we're even backsliding in terms of membership rates. So, but anyway, this proposal, this idea is to take the burden off of the families, the clubs, and the sanctioning bodies on at least some level, and try and redirect that money, give some of that money back now that we know this federation has a 9-figure surplus. And even if they're going to be burning down big chunks of that surplus over this X-year plan that they're embarking on now, still we're getting into serious money. They're not going to burn down
anything because it's all going to get replenished to the 2026 World Cup. But 90 cents a player is not going to make a difference on participation. I'll just tell you that right now. But the idea that $1 for every player is going up to the federation. It might be news to some people when you look at the scale of whatever it is and ask, what do they do for that? Like, what do you get for that dollar? Is probably something to dig into, but it's true of all. It's basically a tax, and it covers overhead and so forth. I'm sure it gets piled into some programs somehow, pays for. I hope maybe it pays for these hotel rooms and these, for the state association presidents to be, attending these important voting events and that sort of stuff. But I guess they probably publish a book on how to play soccer. All these, it is a big thing. And who really knows where this money goes? But like any other tax, let's just cut it and let the kids play the game.
And if you're curious about the nuts and bolts and the details of the AGM, it has its own website, SoccerAGM.com. Go there, check it out if you have any interest in this. I think the federation can always do better with transparency, but there's a fair amount of transparency in terms of the specifics of this information. Much of the schedule and the membership is publicly available. I encourage everyone who has any stake in soccer in this country, find out, are you being represented? Who is your state body there?
Which person is there up the chain
Correct.
that's voting for you? Do you even know? Because again, most people don't even know the board votes for the local club that they play with. So it's it's difficult. But if you have an opinion, you should at least know. And how long has that person been around? Do they represent? Why do we have? If you have a problem with anything you've heard on Glassdoor or who the president, the presidential. I mean, we're halfway through Carlos's term now. Back when after multiple terms of Sunil Gulati just gliding in, without even having to campaign, if you will. So it seemed like people started to pay attention last time. So it's coming up. So in 2 years, there's going to be another election, which you presume in 1 year there's going to be some campaigning going on. So if find out if you care about the sport at all. If you have any complaint, find out what human being that's up the chain from you, probably your state association president, I believe, at some level some human is able to represent you and cast a vote. And find out who that is.
These are typically volunteers. They're not being paid for their time, but there are some nice perks. So, for example, if you're
being paid, they get to go there.
You're getting to stay at a nice hotel and go have this experience. Nashville's
but they put in a lot
city.
of work. Like no volunteer in youth soccer, almost the ones that are true charlatans, perhaps, but no volunteer in youth soccer. And most coaches, for that matter, don't get paid remotely close to what kind of time they dedicate to the sport. So.
And for sure, people should also be aware that the governance structure of the sport is still built around what many of us would consider the older model in soccer terms, which is volunteer-driven, volunteer sort of based youth clubs, as opposed to the more professionalized club-centric model that we see now. And in many cases, it's not necessarily a technical director who's casting these votes. They may have an influence in how
somebody a soccer person.
A soccer person. It may not be a soccer person. It may be a parent who
certainly
volunteered for the board and then stuck around and liked the perks, or is willing to dedicate the time and sit in on board meetings.
I've not looked at the list lately, but I mentioned I was at one of these things in 2002. The folks at least a decade ago that are making these decisions at that level, especially the state presidents, were not soccer players. They were most likely a parent who had a child that played soccer in the 70s, who got involved and found themselves at the top of the pyramid in their state. And they make administrative decisions for the most part with the best guess they can for the soccer. But that has certainly been a big problem that the quote unquote soccer people have talked about over the years.
And these volunteers, again, their service is exemplary for the most part, but I think it's good to know who's casting these votes. If you were confused by the results of the presidential election or how that process worked, my experience was that at the AGM, the rank and file of the voting membership compared to the rank and file of soccer people in this country, consumers and players and parents, was older, probably whiter, probably more conservative, not by political outline, but just in sort of general temperament. Just more, people who are coming from an older model, a previous chapter, maybe, let's say.
I would safe to say a lot of people that still feel like they're playing defense because things are changing so rapidly, versus recognizing how the progressive new models that are evolving, or even looking at how Development Academy, top down from the very federation that they're making decisions about, is sort of trying to take the spotlight and at the youth game. So it was certainly, we want more people that are proactive, I think, than are in a defensive mode, and because all companies and all organizations that aren't growing are basically shrinking.
Right. So and if you're wondering about the voting details, one of the reasons one of the factors that powered Carlos Cordeiro's ascent to the presidential role in the last election is the Stevens Act. There's federal regulations that dictate that national governing bodies must have a minimum, in this case, I believe it's 20% of their voting representation comes from athletes themselves. In this case, it's the Athletes Council, which consists of current and former high-level players, for the most part, high-level players, or at least a cross-section of the various teams that the Federation fields. So that also includes beach and para, not beyond just the men's and women's national teams. But one of the factors, or one of the features so far of Carlos Cordeiro's period in the office has been, he has this phrase about putting soccer people in charge of soccer decisions. So you've seen a number of former national team players, Ernie Stewart, Kate Markgraf, Brian McBride, now in this case with the vice presidential role, which is not a full-time position, but it is a significant position of weight, Sidney Parlow-Cohn. So it's interesting to see, again, on one level, it makes a lot of sense to have more former players. The question is, does that maybe provide them with an outsized influence when it comes to voting, when it comes to decision-making and general policy direction? The professional game, starting with MLS most prominently, does also have an outsized role. They have a significant block of votes in these processes. So all this has led most observers to make Cindy Parlow-Cohn the heavy favorite to retain her vice presidential position. The only candidate running against her is John Paul Mata, who is the president of the U.S. Adult Soccer Association, a membership body within the Federation, who is a longtime servant of the game in this country. He's been outspoken over the last couple of years in terms of all the governance topics and discussions and whatnot. But I think he is a prohibitive underdog in this case. We'll see if he has a master plan that he's going to unveil.
You have to thank him. Soccer players never ever get we can only play on sure. Late on Friday nights because the kids get all the fields. Damn those kids.
But we'll see how that unfolds there. You have to congratulate or thank John Paul Mata for running, because all too often in the past history of this organization, there's been major offices with no election or no
not to be confused with the youth national team head coaching positions.
That's right. That's right. So we'll be watching all this closely. If your eyes glaze over at the very mention of these sorts of things, don't worry. You can we'll circle back next week if anything unusual breaks out of this meeting, and of course follow the usual outlets, your trusted soccer journalists, for any news and updates that may break.
Yeah, well, at the very least, if you're listening to this after these elections took place, so maybe try and keep a scorecard at somewhere and make a game out of it. And so so specifically, I think I heard you're predicting that Cindy Parlow-Cohn will be the vice president.
Yes.
And how do we feel about the voting here for sponsored by the Metropolitan DC Virginia Association to cut the fees, basically by, it looks like 90% cuts to the fees that flow up? Do you think that's going to pass?
My experience of the AGM 2 years ago was that there's significant grassroots support for this, that the rank and file,
they're the ones voting, so why wouldn't, if it gets on the ballot, it's kind of already done, one of those types of things.
And in many cases, these state or associations have very sometimes perilous budget situations year by year. These amounts of money matter to them. Mm-hmm. They are not bringing in
participation rates
surpluses.
Matter dramatically, especially on the youth side. The youth side, there's the recreation side, huge numbers that they get locally. But yet a lot of these state programs are focused on state cups and ODP and so forth. Like, what do they actually do for recreation players? Whole other topic.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Mm-hmm. It's true. And hey, hit us up, news@thesoccerwire.com, if you've got thoughts or experiences on that matter. I wanted to share a few, I guess you could call them perspectives or bits of scuttlebutt on the Jay Berhalter situation. I just wanted to touch on this a little bit. Again, as I mentioned earlier, what has been described to me as a little bit of a desperate Hail Mary attempt by Federation employees to exert some level of influence or express something of what was going on the inside of the organization. Yeah, via these Glassdoor reviews. It's remarkable to me because on balance, this seems to have worked, and not only worked in the sense of derailing what they saw as an undesirable outcome, which is Jay Berhalter being sort of crowned as CEO and being in that's a position that he could occupy for the next quarter century and have a huge impact. I mean, the CEO is the highest ranking full-time employee at the Federation, has huge influence over decision-making and policy and direction. So again, I was struck by the bravery and the boldness and the resourcefulness of this, what appears to be a relatively small band of employees. Maybe there's a groundswell.
They were never identified, right? Nobody,
as far as we know, and that's understandable too, because this is an organization, unfortunately, that has at least a perception and arguably a track record of quashing dissent, of not necessarily rewarding open, outspoken speech. Carlos Cordeiro seems to have taken this to heart. And again, remember, as a president, he's not a full-time employee. He's a little bit like a board member, a nonprofit board president who has a little bit of distance from the organization. He seems to have taken notice of this really striking situation sort of within the organization he's at the top of, and is trying to build in ways for membership, or ways for employees and staff to express themselves, to change the culture, to create a more open, harmonious culture where people feel more comfortable speaking out. Because there clearly was a culture problem, and probably will remain. It will take time to change the culture of Soccer House, where there is, again, anecdotally and strong perception, and insiders speak emotionally about the cultural shortcomings there. And so I've had as many conversations as I can around this issue over the last few months. Interestingly enough, I think as much headwinds as the organization faces, with constant criticism, a really dubious, frustrated fan base, especially on the men's side in terms of the national team and the state of it. The people within the federation seem to feel more optimism than a few months ago, because there are things changing. There are hopefully going to be some good things to talk about in the coming months, and want to try and turn a page in 2020.
Just the big question for me is what does all of this have to do with what the fans see, which is, the World Cup winning capability of the men's team at the very least, and the issue with the women's side. We didn't really dig into the topic about the players union and the men's players union that just completely lit up U.S. soccer
as we speak. As we've been recording this episode, the men's national team's player union has issued a lengthy and blistering statement in support of the women's national team's efforts at improved collective bargaining in their search for pay equality, the various means, both in terms of litigation and negotiation, that the women are enacting to try and mend what they see as a systematic inequality between the men's and women's sides. So the men have spoken out in support, and have ripped the federation for a lot of the topics touching on a lot of what we talked about today, which is sort of monopolizing the scene, questions about unscrupulous business arrangements with everybody from SUM to MLS to any number of different theories or perceptions there. So it's a really still an eventful time. There's, I think, still a lot of simmering discontent in and around the federation about how things are done. And we look to see whether the story will change, whether perceptions will change, and whether the underlying circumstances will change in 2020, because it's a big year. And the 2026 World Cup, which you mentioned, is probably a big revenue
qualifying
driver.
Is getting ready to ramp up on the men's side. We
have a set of qualifying for 2022, and then the bigger movements in this country. Is that when the light's
going to be really shine from the fan base? I mean, again, there's so much talk about this inside baseball, basically about these AGMs and so forth. The fact of the matter is, most people see U.S. soccer as the U.S. men's national team and the U.S. women's national team. And the U.S. soccer stated mission is to make soccer the preeminent sport in America, correct? I mean, so what does that mean? Well, it just feels like over the last 20 years, since they went out of near bankruptcy from the 1994 World Cup, I guess 30 years at this point, where they've mostly focused on, well, we can make as much money as possible so we can invest in the game, and that will give us the best chance at advancing the game and making the sport a preeminent sport in this country, versus the Joe fan that just wants our freaking national teams to win. And so they can't get that right on the men's side. And on the women's side, they've sort of been lucky that the women have been so good, because the stuff that's coming out on this has been over and over and over again an example about where they've taken the women for granted, and they keep winning World Cups anyway. So, screw you guys, now pay us. So,
which is not entirely fair, right? Because anybody who was at the Baltimore coaches convention last month, or has seen any of Jill Ellis's public appearances recently, she's been on a busy circuit of media appearances and speaking engagements. And when you hear the nuts and bolts of how the women's national team operates, they've got an entourage of staff. They've got cutting edge sports technology. They've got a domestic league that
most of which got ramped up in 2015. 2015 when they pretty much were the surprise winners of the World Cup when everybody thought that their days were done. So maybe that's oversimplifying the situation. But
the question, I think, people, I will say that within the Fed, there's some frustration of rank and file people who feel like they get ripped for the problems and shortcomings.
Sure, and I'm not ripping.
Don't get any credit for the for the successes.
My point was trying to take the perspective of stepping outside of what we know of, and we know a lot of these people personally. It's just, the whole point of having, what is the U.S. Soccer Federation to the outside person? It is the national teams, and they see the women winning, and they're like, great. They have no idea where maybe how the rest of the world has been, underinvested in the women's game, and that had a lot to do with our women's teams being strong early and the strong college system. So they see the women winning World Cups. They're like, hey, everything must be great. But now they're hearing stuff like this. This is like a public airing of really, what is being accused of some unfair crap going on. So again, now it's like, what's going on? They can't win. The men are supposed to be, I thought we were supposed to win a World Cup in 2010, and now what? So, but the 2026 World Cup here in the United States, I'm telling you, hopefully, bless us all, we're still all going to be on this earth when this happens to see it again. It's gonna change a lot, and there's gonna be a ton of money and a ton of focus. And I think we all just want to be competitive in that system, and a lot of this stuff hopefully will just take care of itself. I
think the bigger picture and the elephant in the room amid the whole Jay Berhalter sort of rumbling fiasco or situation is the federation and the game as a whole. We have this strange relationship with money, right? Because U.S. soccer is not necessarily always good at developing players or fielding
not their
world
players,
championship national teams, but it's very good at making, and the system as a whole is very good at making money. It's an economic driven system. Everybody knows you need money. I mean, the world's best teams for the most part are well funded. They're at the apex of a rich, diverse, dynamic, and economically successful game as a whole, a culture. And we know that we need to support the national teams as much as we can to provide them with every competitive advantage possible. That takes money. But then the question is, at some point, has the pursuit of money been eclipsed the root goal of growing the game and making the national teams better? So in Jay Berhalter's case, this is a guy, it's easy to be down on him right now, but most people on the inside will credit him with almost single-handedly saving the Copa America Centenario that brought in 2016, that brought in millions upon millions of dollars and that to the coffers of the federation. He was integral to making that event happen, to keeping it together while South American and FIFA corruption allegations nearly torpedoed it entirely, and then negotiating the hard bargains with the various federations and confederations involved to make that event happen, to make it profitable. Even going all the way back to the 2003 Women's World Cup that was moved to the U.S. on short notice because of, I think it was the bird flu epidemic.
It was,
in China.
Speaking of which, I think it was SARS, wasn't it? Or was it bird flu?
Yeah, it may have been SARS. But right. so again, on almost a dime's turnaround in organizational terms, Jay Berhalter salvaged that event, made sure it happened, made sure it was profitable, made sure it grew the game. So this is a guy who's extraordinarily good and respected on the financial side of the industry, and his legacy. He has left a huge legacy. He's a huge
a couple of employees at U.S. Soccer just didn't like his management style, so took to Glassdoor, and now he's out. Is that basically it?
But
culturally just the time has passed? It's time for something new.
I think the skill set that made him so effective at the financial side of things, which is so necessary to this federation. However, that was paired with a very abrasive personality that's, for whatever reason, seems to have inspired, really incredible amounts of, like, the firsthand accounts of people who worked with him or around him were almost universally negative over the months that I've been speaking to people about this. And not just negative, not just like, not my kind of guy, like, I loathe that individual. I don't want to be in the same
to that
room.
Level of stuff, or just
various stories. There's stories of badgering. There's stories of rudeness. There's stories of machinations and manipulations behind the scene, of just being a cold fish. Again, it's not fair to. I normally would say, like, let's have Jay on to talk about it, but Jay doesn't do those kind of things. He's not a forward-facing person. But I would say you need people like that behind the curtain on some level, right? To have a specialty and a strength, right? What caused the backlash and eventually scuppered his hopes and led to him leaving the organization entirely.
So he's resigned. That's the official.
Yes, not only so. My understanding is that he, in recent months, over the past month or so, he was told that he had gone from being a front runner, finalist for the CEO position to, within the last month, he was told directly, "You will not be hired. You're no longer under consideration." And this has led him not only to leave the organization entirely, which is, we saw this a little bit with Kathy Carter, sort of leaving some and leaving the space, the soccer space in general, at least for a time, because of the ramifications and the fallout from her running for federation president.
I'd like to see her get involved again. I hope she does.
Yeah, but it's when you see, when you're in an organization a long time, you feel like you need to make a next step forward. To a lesser extent,
Amanda Duffy. Amanda Duffy's been NWSL for 3 years and not being, clearly wanting the commissioner job, and she didn't get it. So she's like, okay, I'm done.
Yeah, I mean, we're guessing, right? But we're speculating here. But I think there's a lot of reasons to believe that was the case. It's kind of a watershed. We'll see if Jay Berhalter was a bigger ingredient in the success of the federation, at least in financial terms,
or maybe
than we thought, than we gave him credit for.
In 2 weeks, he gets announced as the new CEO of Coca-Cola or something.
It's true.
And we find out that this was actually just normal career rotation, and a bigger and better opportunity came along. Maybe he's at SUM. Maybe he's at MLS. Maybe he's in the Premier League.
Yeah,
go work for Ivan or something. So who knows? But yeah, I mean, it does look like the optics that the glass door was a couple of the coffin being presented with where the nails should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really amazing. I think we'll look back on this for some time to come. And again, will the federation be able to make the 2026 World Cup the successes that these mega events of the past were without Jay Berhalter?
Yeah.
Well, maybe he won't be.
We'll never know,
because
it'll be so disgustingly profitable. It'll just be like
it certainly looks that way.
It's like the Donald Duck scene in the golden coins in the Disney.
Scrooge McDuck's vault. Yes, indeed. So I think that's probably a good place to leave it. Thanks everyone for listening. We shall see what transpires.
Let's see how your predictions hold true.
And a special call out to anyone who's in Nashville. If you're attending the AGM. If you want to share some feedback
when you hear this,
if you have attended the AGM, hit us up with an email, or you can get at me directly via Twitter at CBOEHM. Send me a DM. My Signal information is up there on my Twitter handle. If anybody wants to get in touch in confidential terms, let us know what you thought. And as always, with every episode, please listen, rate, subscribe, tell your friends about us, and hit us up at news@thesoccerwire.com with any questions, comments, feedback, etc.